This is Inside the BFA, the official podcast of the Balloon Federation of America. Each episode of Inside the BFA is an open discussion of the many aspects of the sport of ballooning and the BFA's work to represent its members and the ballooning community at large. Now, here's your host, editor of the BFA's Ballooning Journal, Glenn Moyer.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside the BFA. I'm Glenn Moyer, the BFA Ballooning Journal editor, and I've read that after January the 5th, you're not supposed to do this, but please allow me to say Happy New Year on behalf of all of the leadership of the Balloon Federation of America. Hope your 2026 is off to a safe and happy start. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the National Balloon Museum, and it was almost 2 years before the museum was damaged. There was just literally 1 week prior to what was a planned grand reopening at the time. And that was because the museum annually, you may not know this, closes for the winter months of December, January, and February. So it was just coming up on the reopening when the fire happened. Here you can see a couple of images excuse me, of the damage from inside. Fortunately, there was a great deal more damage to the structure than to the contents, to the artifacts. We'll talk about that a bit here this evening. As a result, the museum artifacts were moved out and provided to a firm. You can see how they were gathered there in the aftermath of the fire. They were that's the storage, so we don't need to go there yet, Fred. The museum artifacts were moved to a firm in Michigan for restoration and cleaning and deodorizing. The building itself was undergoing a very similar process at that time. The BFA, in fact, had to move its offices where our operations director, Denise Day, works out of the building and was fortunately able to find some temporary accommodations thanks to a local lifetime member, Todd Isley. It had been hoped to reopen the museum this past summer. In fact, in July, to coordinate with the annual Hall of Fame ceremonies and the National Balloon Classic there in Indianola. But unfortunately, circumstances didn't allow for that. The building has, of course, now been refurbished and repaired. The artifacts began returning a few months ago, and the museum staff are now in the process of moving everything back in and finally getting the museum back into shape for what hopefully will be a public reopening. Tonight, we're going to discuss how that process is progressing, as well as the future of the museum and how you can get involved in that process, how you can help, and what we all see is for the long-term future and growth of the National Balloon Museum in Indianola, Iowa. My guests this evening are, first of all, Jason Jones, who many people know, of course, as the president of the Balloon Federation of America. Kendra Meeks is joining us. She is the new operations manager for the National Balloon Museum. Ken Walter is a balloonist that many of you will know. Having been a pilot since 1988, Ken's logged over 2,000 hours in his balloons. He and his wife own and operate Wind Dancer Balloon Promotions in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I always fear I'm going to call that Waukesha or something bizarre, but it's Waukesha, Wisconsin. Sorry, Ken. Ken is also a former director of the Balloon Federation of America, of the BFA's HACD, and he has been a member of the National Balloon Museum Board of Directors since 2010. The newest member of our group tonight, Jocelyn Sperry. Now, Jocelyn is an emerging professional in the museum field. She is currently serving on the Balloon Museum's Board of Directors. Prior to that, she worked as a liaison to the museum for the board, or the board's museum, I should say, for about 6 months leading up to the fire. That's not to say she had anything to do with the fire. It's just one of those convenient things that, one of those coincidences of her employment. She's currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Museum Studies, and while she does not possess, admittedly, a strong connection to ballooning outside of the museum, I'm told that she's learning on the job every day. So, Jocelyn, thank you for joining us. Let's get started tonight. And again, of course, we have our chat room where those of you viewing can ask questions and make comments, and I'll be monitoring that. We'll try to answer some of those questions that you might pose toward the end of the program. But I want to get started. First of all, Ken, A bit of history. The BFA has had a long relationship with the National Balloon Museum. I've been around long enough. I can remember when our previous operations director, office manager, I think was her title, Sharon Ripperger, got to move the BFA office from what was a storefront in downtown Indianola out into this new beautiful building that was the National Balloon Museum. We've been there a long time. As I said, we had to vacate the premises as a result of the fire. Can you give us an update, bring us up to speed on where the BFA's involvement with the museum is now? Is our office reopened? And how do you see the two organizations moving forward together?
Thanks, Glenn. Well, yes, our offices are back in the National Balloon Museum. We're very excited about that. You mentioned Sharon Ripperger, and if you remember when Sharon ran the BFA out of the museum, we're back in those office spaces. Kendra and the board of the museum have some other ideas for our office that we were in previously before the fire. But really, one thing I want to really reiterate is I'm an Indianola kid. I'm currently on the BFA board, obviously, and the museum is very important to me. And it was very important to me when I became president to make sure that relationship was strong. They have a good, strong board. They hired Kendra with, the idea that they would have kind of the point of the spear to help the board, who, are all volunteers, to continue to get the museum going in the right direction. And of course, then when the fire happens, lots of things change and focus changes. So our goal is, as an organization, as the BFA, is to continue to build and work on the relationship with the museum, try to help provide support in getting the museum back up and running. And of course, we love the partnership, and we love the Hall of Fame and all the things that you get to do there in Indianola related to the National Balloon Museum.
It's a great facility. I've been very pleased with my long association with the board to have attended a number of annual board meetings up there. I haven't been in a few years, so I'm looking forward to getting back once the museum is reopened. Ken, thank you, or Jason, rather, thank you for being here this evening. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Ken, let's move into some of the more nitty-gritty now. As I mentioned a moment ago, the artifacts started returning, I think, in about September. I know you're in the process of moving things back in. Some things still have to be cleaned and restored. Give us an update if you can. What's the current status at the building now with regard to getting the museum back up on its feet?
Well, sure. Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, we're in the process. We're getting closer every day. We've been lucky to have a lot of local balloonists and other enthusiasts that have helped us unloading semis and stuff, because 90% of the stuff was at a cleaning facility, a facility that's made just for cleaning artifacts and stuff like that in Michigan. We got it all hauled back at the end of the summer, September. I think there was 3 or 4 semi-loads that we brought back in. And most of that was all in great shape that we could get it all back into the building. And we're just in the process now of getting things staged in the building. We still have, I think it's 3 pods that are outside. You showed a picture before of one of the pods that we had stuff that didn't get shipped out, that was still on site. The biggest thing that didn't get sent out to be cleaned was the balloon baskets. We have a number of balloon baskets. I want to say Kendra can correct me, but I think it was around 30 baskets that we had in the museum. And we've been in the process of cleaning those locally. We're also getting in some new historic stuff. Already we've had a couple of big donations come in of material in the last month or so. We went up to Matt Whitaker's place. He was closing out, his wife was closing out his place, and we've got a huge U-Haul trailer full of stuff that was Matt's, a lot of Aerostar stuff, obviously, that's in great shape, that we can replace some of those baskets that were damaged and didn't necessarily have significance. Now, there's plenty of baskets that had significance. The Channel Champ, Tracy Barnes styrofoam basket, the body glove, if you remember that, or a body helmet, if you remember that. You
Yes.
know, all those are there and clean, and we're just now the museum, and you'll hear more later that we're going through a strategic plan of how we're going to set things back up again and really get this museum operating at a top level. But kind of lost my train of thought there with the artifacts. But we have
Well,
all the stuff back, and we've spent a couple of long weekends just going through everything and making sure we have that we can actually use. And unfortunately, there's some stuff that did get damaged and destroyed, but in the grand scheme of things, I would say probably less than, I don't know, Kendra, less than 10, 15% of what we had was actually destroyed. Mostly smoke and damage, that kind of stuff. Probably the biggest thing that we lost were display cases and all the stuff that they were in that we couldn't, that we're in the process of replacing to be able to get things back in.
those fortunately can be replaced, I'm sure, as
Right.
opposed to some of the more historic artifacts. What are some of the challenges that you've discovered in this process of moving everything out, sending it away, moving it back, and now moving it back in? That sounds like a tremendous uh, pain in the you know what, but an awful lot of work, I would think.
Right, and it is probably the biggest thing that Kendra's really been working hard on is getting everything cataloged properly. That's probably a thing that when the museum started and was going through, we're balloonists, we're not museum curators, like Jocelyn's learning so much and teaching us so much about the museum business, that we didn't have a lot of those things properly cataloged and stuff like that. A lot of things written on paper and stuff. So we're slowly taking things bit by bit and getting them cataloged and properly marked so we know exactly what we have, and then we can place things a little bit better than we had. But it's going to have a new look. We've got the building itself looks a heck of a lot different than it did. We've got new flooring. We've got everything's new inside. So it's not going to look the same as it was. It's going to look a lot better. It's going to have a more modern look, and we'll have a little bit pretty exciting, the showcase coming up of when we get things back in place.
We've got some images of that we'll look at in a few moments. I've heard about some exciting things that are being done. We'll talk about that as well. Kendra, Ken is talking about having to store things, having to catalog things. We showed an early image. Not everything was shipped away, as we've talked about. Some things were stored and are being stored on site. Tell me a bit about that and your role in how are things being stored? How are you going about cataloging that? And are there some things that maybe were never on display and maybe may not go out on display right now? I'm sure there are some things that the museum is entrusted with that just has not yet and may not yet make it out onto the display floor.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you. So we have been storing things that we didn't send into the restoration company. We stored them in shipping containers in the back. That was all of the baskets. So Ken alluded to 30 or so. And that is absolutely correct. We've got upwards of 40 baskets that vary from, the very first basket that we have in our inventory was from World War I. And so we still have that basket, and then of course all the way through every other type of basket that there was. But in addition to that, we've got all of the prints. So the museum was covered in posters, framed and unframed posters. And so we sent everything away. We decided what we wanted to clean, what needed to be cleaned for significant purposes. And then we decided, okay, we've got several posters, which you're seeing here. This picture is the original, or the office that the BFA had in the museum that they moved out of. That is now our poster room. So all of those posters that you see in there have never even been on the walls. Those came from our basement storage.
Wow.
And so we have just an incredible opportunity to put things out that have never been out before. So as we're uncovering all of these artifacts that have been down in the basement, in addition to the posters, there's many things that I just am so excited to put on display and to make available for the visitors to come take a look at.
So it sounds like there's a certain amount of discovery going on in this process, the finding of
Very
things
much.
that maybe some of you didn't even know were there.
Very much so. Yeah.
Jocelyn, let me ask you, as the museum expert in our panel then, how difficult a process is it to go through and catalog all of this? And now who's making the decisions, and how do you decide what goes on display and what does not?
Yeah, so it's going to be a very lengthy process. As we go through, everything is going to need to receive an accession number and object ID. So when we put them into our system, instead of trying to describe the object, we can put in this object ID, the number that is very specific to each item, and that will make it pop up in our system, and it'll have the information about where it is located in the museum, the background, where it came from, all of that fun stuff, but all of that needs to be manually inputted. So luckily this semester because I'm still a student, so to me it's still a semester. This spring we have 3 interns, so they will be coming in and doing that data entry and getting us started. But it is going to be a long process, but we're trying to figure out what will be on display and versus what will need to go into storage. Most likely the objects going into storage will be should hide instead of getting those numbers. So later on we can work on our storage as organizing it and making sure that everything has a spot. But we're really trying to focus on what will go back out on the floor. Currently, just about everything that was returned has gone back out on our exhibit floor. So it's a matter of going through and deciding what we can put away for the time being and what will stay out.
Ken alluded earlier that it is going to be different. We do have a couple of images of some of the newer look, and obviously things are not all back in place yet. But even as you're talking about everything being moved back out onto the floor, I think I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kendra telling me, and I think Jocelyn, perhaps this was a project you were involved with, that just prior to the fire, the exhibits had been basically rearranged so that the visitor experience was one where when you walked in the door, you sort of went chronologically through the history of ballooning from its very beginning in the 1700s to present day based on the artifacts on display. I'm guessing, Jocelyn, you were a large part of that in your previous role with the board prior to being on the board. Is that still the plan as we move to reopening? Is that floor plan still a part of the works?
Yes, Kendra and I actually did a walkthrough today and kind of gave a little bit more detail to what we had been previously thinking about. So when you walk in, first we have a brand new mural that a local artist did for us over last winter, I think. And then you will start with oil paintings from an artist who did a whole series on the origins of ballooning. So it's pre-Montgolfier, and then you'll move into focusing on Montgolfier and all of their work. And then we want to highlight airships and gas ballooning, and then we'll focus on Yoast and the Channel Champ, all within our very first room. And that is what we're going to focus our history into. So everything beyond can be more focused in the modern day to an aspect. We'll always have some space that can be rotated out. So we can always be putting new things out that are older that we haven't had on display before, and give people something new to come and visit. But we're really excited to start getting things moved out. Our theater will still be there. We have expanded that, so there's more room for seating. We're expanding the women in ballooning section and moving that a little bit, and then hoping to help all of the championship and contest trophies and memorabilia all into one area, just to kind of centralize that in one part of the museum rather than having it in multiple places, just because of how the museum was set up originally. It was hard to move things once they were in their spots. So it's an awesome chance to have a blank slate to work off of.
So beyond revitalizing, let's use that term, the visitor experience, I know the board has been in discussions. Ken made reference to it just a bit earlier in his opening remarks, that the board has just recently been working on and perhaps completed a 3-year strategic plan, looking not just beyond the reopening, but going further into the future. Who would like to address that? I don't know if the board members should address that, or Kendra, you're nodding your head. I know too that I think there's a retreat coming up to continue that discussion. Kendra, maybe, okay, Jocelyn, why don't you take the lead on that and tell us a little bit about the strategic plan and what that's going to mean for the future of the museum.
Yeah, so this all ended up working out because I am a graduate student at the Cooperstown Graduate Program, which is in upstate New York, in Cooperstown, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. So I moved from one Hall of Fame to another. But out there, we actually have a class that's focused on strategic planning. And a big focus at our program is working with real institutions to do real work that will be used in the field. So when the beginning of the semester rolled around and I was talking with my faculty and we hadn't found an organization to work with for the class, I was able to put the Balloon Museum's name in there, and it all worked out great. Got started in August. We did a lot of stakeholder calls. So myself and 9 classmates and Peter Roos, a museum professional who's done a lot of work on the East Coast, worked together to collaborate with the board and create a list of community members and board members and what we would consider core stakeholders to the museum. And we crafted a survey so we could call and get information on what their opinions of the museum was, if there was anything they wanted to see in the future moving forward, what they thought we could be doing better. So all of that information was really valuable as we moved forward, because especially being in New York, it's not like we could all go and visit Iowa, unfortunately. So it was a great opportunity for us all to get a chance to talk one-on-one with the community members. And from there, we were able to work with the board to craft a new mission statement, a new vision statement, core values statements, and we identified 5 critical issues for the museum to focus on in the next 2 to 3 years, and did our best to map out that information in the best way possible about what are the steps. For example, one of them is the collections care. So what will need to be done to get that back up to best practice in the museum field, whether it's working with these collections interns or continuing to try to establish a long-term volunteer program for people to come in and help us accession our items and put them all together. So we've been doing a lot of work, and we had it finished at the end of the semester, and we're really excited to sit down with the board, and I'll be able to show all the work that we've done, and then we can talk about how we're going to take all the information that my classmates and I put together and actually put it to work for the museum.
Outstanding. I look forward to hearing a great deal more about that. Kendra, as the new operations manager there at the museum, a plan like that must be of great value to you in mapping out your day-to-day operations and knowing kind of what the path is to go forward. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, honestly, the strategic plan is invaluable to us. So truly, it is something that was desperately needed. It couldn't have come at a better time, knowing that we were struggling of where to go and what to do following the fire. So the strategic plan was absolutely essential, and I am thrilled that we are able to have a 3-year plan mapped out for us that will take us from just the basics of reopening and what we need to do next, all the way through our programming and what kind of children's and adult programming we can start offering now. That is more of a regular, consistent basis. So it will be critical for our success. So, as you had mentioned before, we are having a board retreat coming up this weekend where we are getting in person, face to face, and we're spending a couple of days together where we can visit another museum and see how they're doing kind of a refresh on their end, finding some of those parallels between their operation and with us. And then we're also going to be spending the day Sunday just doing a deep dive into that plan, the strategic plan, and focusing on our reopening timeline and how things are going to get done and where we need to focus essentially right away.
Indianola has a long relationship with the National Balloon Museum, with the sport of ballooning, dating way back to the earliest BFA national championships. I'm curious, Kendra, what has been the reaction and the follow-up, if you will, the involvement of the local community? One, the reaction to the fire, and then what, if any, role have they had and are they having in this ongoing process now to bring the museum back?
Yeah, the community was very sad, of course. This is very institutional for Indianola. So, as you are driving into our town, this is one of the first things that you come to. So, it's really important that we come back and that we don't have any longer. We're not closed any longer than we have to be. So the community was very supportive. They've been very receptive to, you know, when I put things out on our social media for requests. We've had a good response. We always need more, so I will always push for additional help. So it is just me here and the day-to-day runnings of the museum. So if there's people that have free time and want to volunteer their time with me, I will absolutely take them. But the community is very supportive and they're very anxious to get it back open just as we are.
Jocelyn, let me come back to you for a moment, being the museum's expert again in our group. We have, in the sport of ballooning, we have the National Balloon Museum, of course, there in Indianola, Iowa. We have the Anderson Abruzzo Albuquerque International Balloon Museum in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there is a new museum coming together in the Carolinas, in North Carolina. From a museum, I hate to keep using the term expert, but that will be your role, and as you say, as you're working on your master's now. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it too many cooks in the kitchen? Or museums like these, each one is individual, but do you find ways to work together to help each other? I guess I'm asking, are those other museums, will they be partners in some fashion, or do you see them as competitors, or are you all working toward the same goal of telling a history of the sport of ballooning?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that would make museums really compete against each other is proximity. So with a new museum opening in North Carolina, we're not too concerned. If anything, it just gives us an opportunity to have some new partners in the field. Right now, as we're working through our collection, we're seeing that there are a lot of duplicates or things that aren't necessarily related to our mission, that if they aren't working for us in our collection, we can always work with the new museum as well as the Albuquerque Museum to see if they would like to add those artifacts to their collection, and vice versa if they were to want de-accession some of their items and offer them to us, then we could see if that would be something to fit within our collections here at the museum. But if anything, we're just excited to have some more happy balloon museum folk.
Okay. Um, Ken, I'm going to come to you in just a moment. I'm going to go back to Kendra for just a moment, though. As the day-to-day person at the museum, how do you see the role of the museum in as a repository for part of the history of ballooning and in the process of being a storyteller, as it were, to share the history of ballooning with the visiting public? And that brings me to one of our questions, too, that has come up tonight, and that is, how many annual visitors was the museum experiencing prior to the fire? So how do you see yourself in the museum as a storyteller of our history?
Right. So we had annually about 4,000 visitors. Of course, the week of the Classic was our busiest month. So we have a big opportunity to grow that number. And that's where this kind of refresh will, this rebirth, I guess, is more, it's more than a refresh, but that will allow us to increase that visitorship. So we'll start reaching out to daycares and senior living communities, more people within the community that can make their scheduled tours to the museum, and of course schools. So there's a lot of opportunity to increase that, those visitors as they come in. What was the rest of your question?
Just about how you see the museum's role as a repository of the history of ballooning and how you share that on a day-to-day basis with visitors.
Yeah, so it's going through this strategic planning process and coming up with that mission really sets the stage for how important keeping that history of ballooning alive. So there's so much to learn and discover, and people are genuinely curious about hot air ballooning. Some people, that have lived in Indianola their entire lives have never stepped foot in the museum. There's other people who have come to the museum but have never been to the Classic event. So there's just so much opportunity to get to a new set of people. So holding all of that, as you say, the repository for all of the artifacts is really critical. And so that is what gets me excited to showcase some of those new things that haven't been on display yet.
I can kind of relate to what you're saying. As a native Texan, in a time many years ago when I worked in radio and television in San Antonio, Texas, where the Alamo is, of course, and Texans will know the historic significance of that, as many others will. I was sometimes shocked to find out how many San Antonians had never stepped into the Alamo. How does that happen? You have a museum like the National Balloon Museum right there in your backyard. How do you not visit it? And that's a part, I'm sure, of the role of yourself and the strategic plan is to bring the community in, not just from afar, but locally as well. Ken, bear with me one more moment. I'm coming to you in just a second, I promise. But while I have you, Kendra, another question that came up, and we don't need to dwell on this, but the question is, what was the cause of the fire? If I remember, it was electrical. What was the cost of what was lost? And did insurance cover any or a part of the overall problem, I guess, or situation?
Yeah. So the cause was electrical. There was a short that we discovered in an outlet for the gift shop, right outside of the gift shop. So that just smoldered and smoldered for hours and caused a lot of heat damage, but there was no flames. So thankfully, we didn't have those flames to ruin the artifacts. There was a few things ruined, like we said, but it could have been so much worse. So that was the cause. And the cost was roughly $2 million. And that's about what we got out of insurance. So as you can imagine, to rebuild your house after a fire costs a whole lot more than what your insurance covers. So we need more funds. We need more money to help us get things back to where we're able to increase some of our technology, offering some of our, rather than having things just just stepping up a little bit, in upping our game, having televisions more prominent and having more digital displays, and even just the basic operations of the museum itself. So more is always needed.
Everyone tonight has talked about needing more help. Ken, one of the questions that's come up tonight, and since you're not living there in Indianola and yet you serve on the board, how can BFA members help? Not most of us are not, a great many of us anyway, are certainly not near to Indianola. We can't physically show up at the museum and donate a day of our labor or whatever. So what ways can BFA members get involved in helping to bring the museum back to life?
You'd kind of be surprised because we've had people from around the country that have come in and taken
Really?
vacation time and helped. Yeah,
Wow.
we've had a couple of different people that have come up that really saw, that it was very important to them to come and help. So yeah, that's a little bit tougher. We do have a great local balloon community in Indianola that does come and help, and we ask for help from them as much as we can. But mostly, being a member, becoming a member of our museum, we've got a whole
That's like an annual subscription is what you're saying, right?
Yep. We've got a whole new brochure. It's on my desk here somewhere, but that's got a whole list of ways that you can become a member and annually help out. We do have, you can easily just send a check in. We don't really have like a GoFundMe, but we do have, funds that come in to help out with that. We've had a couple of great benefactors recently that have just written us a check, and said, we want to help, and monetary help is very important as, the physical help. But yeah, so if you go to, I think Kendra would have to correct me, but I think we're linked into the BFA website where we can, take donations through that, or if it's not there yet, that's part of the plan, that, through the Facebook page and through the website, where you can reach out that way, or just email us and we can connect. Kendra is on top of our emails all the time to be able to connect with people. If you have artifacts that you want to donate, you can send that stuff in too. I mean, that's all stuff that we need to be able to keep moving forward. But the big thing that we're looking at is building our membership. Building the museum, supporting communities, and we've got a lot of that stuff figured out where you can do that. I did want to mention briefly on the cause. It was not an electrical short in the system, in the wiring. It was an appliance that was plugged into the system. So it wasn't in the building. It was an appliance that was plugged in. Oddly enough, it was the doorbell chime that was plugged in, and it shorted out, and it didn't. And that's why it was an exterior with a lot of smoke and not really a lot of fire, because it wasn't inside the walls. It was, on the front, of the outlet. And I think some people got confused by when you say electrical short. It wasn't in the wall. It was something that was plugged in. So that tells everybody, be careful of what you have plugged in. Make sure you keep on top of that stuff.
I actually was just reading a thing because I've been battling with a high electric bill here that talked about the benefit of unplugging, especially small appliances. If
Right.
like your coffee makers and your Keurigs and all that sort of stuff, it's
Right.
better to unplug it and plug it in as you need it than to leave it all the time. One, because
Absolutely.
it's constantly draining energy, and as a result, if it's always plugged in, there is the possibility like that of an electrical short.
Right.
I guess the remaining question for this evening, there's a lot more we could cover, but we try to keep this to a reasonable time frame. We're further along now than we were. Originally, it was thought, well, we'd open up really soon. And then it was thought, well, let's open up in time for the Hall of Fame and the National Balloon Classic last summer. We didn't get there. Is there now a reliably predictable time frame, or is the situation really still very fluid? And I don't know who wants to answer that, so I'll throw that out for. I see Kendra nodding her head. Maybe as the operations manager,
Sure.
you should handle that.
Yeah, so it still is very fluid. So we are definitely doing everything we can to be reopened in time for the Classic in July. But that's going to take a lot of work. So that's part of what our retreat is this weekend, is to go through and actually sit down and timeline things out to see how realistic it's going to be to get everything into a place that's presentable. So that is our goal. And that is what we are shooting for, but it's not set in stone.
Very well. Kendra, Ken, Jocelyn, thank you all for being with us tonight. We appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for what you're doing for the sport of ballooning, for the Ballooning Museum. Ken and I have been friends for a long, long time. It's good to see you again, buddy. We don't get to get together enough like we used to. And I look forward to getting up to the museum once it reopens and seeing it again in the very near future. So thank you all again for being here with us tonight. I want to remind you, please, to mark your calendars. The first Tuesday of every month is now when Inside the BFA will be coming to you live in our live stream. And of course, it's always available shortly after to be viewed on demand on YouTube. And it'll be the first Tuesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. Central Time is when we go live. Please be sure to like and share the episodes so we can build the audience here and expand our hopefully positive message about the Balloon Federation and the sport of ballooning. If you have a subject that you would like to hear us discuss on this podcast in the future, reach out to any member of the board of directors, drop a note to Denise Day in the BFA office, or you can reach out to me via email at editor@office@BFA or editor@office.bfa.net. and or just pick up the phone and give me a call. We'll be happy to take your suggestions. Next month, we do have a fun episode coming up. It's what I'm calling an open mic with the BFA board, where you'll be able to ask anything you'd like, really, of the board of directors. We're not quite sure who all is going to be on yet, because if we had all 10 people on, it would be like watching an episode of the Brady Bunch. I'm not sure we want to go there, but we will have members of the board with us next time and be taking your questions either live in the comments as we've seen tonight, or you can submit those earlier, again, via email to me, to any board member, or to Denise in the office. And I think with that, I just need to say on behalf of our guests this evening and our producer that you don't see behind the scenes, Fred Poole, for doing another great job. Thank you for tuning in and watching. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Inside the BFA. I'm Glenn Moyer. Thanks for watching. Good luck and good night.
Thank you for viewing this episode of Inside the BFA. Membership in the Balloon Federation of America is your entry into the sport of ballooning, whether you're a pilot, crew, or an enthusiast. Everyone is welcome inside the BFA. For more information, see our website at www.bfa.net.